Hello everyone, it's Bree here from Blossom and Branch, and today we are talking about pansies. Pansies are such a favorite for me in the garden because they're so bright and cheerful, they're colorful, they have multiple purposes, so I love using pansies for simple syrups. I like drying them and pulsing them with sugar in a food processor to make pansy sugar. I like pressing them, drying them. There's just so many fun uses for pansies, and they're beautiful. The scent is amazing and they're just gorgeous. Today I'm going to show you how I'm able to grow them this tall so that we can actually use them for cutting, because normally pansies grow pretty short. They're usually fairly stocky, which is fine if you're using just the flowers for edible purposes, but if you want to use them for cutting, you need to make them a little taller. So one of the keys to getting pansies that are nice and tall is selecting the right seed. So I do grow all of my pansies from seed. The ones that you're going to buy as a plant at the garden center probably are never going to get this tall. So we do grow them from seed, and these seeds specifically are bred for cut flower production. So that means that they are estimated to get much taller than your standard pansy seed. So these ones, I have a mix here of a mix called Frizzle Sizzle and another one called Mulberry Shades. They're both from Johnny's Seeds and they had a great germination rate. And there are a couple tricks to growing pansies from seed. Starting pansies from seed can be a little bit daunting. They can be known as a trickier one to germinate, and that is because they actually require dark to germinate. So unlike a lot of seeds that we grow for cut flower production, these ones actually need darkness. So what we do is we plant them into our soil blocks and we cover the entire tray with a 10-20 tray or just whatever you need to use to keep it dark, absolute dark. That means you don't even want them to have ambient light from any source. You really want them in the dark. So once we seed them, we go ahead and we put them into a dark space, and they actually prefer a slightly cooler temperature to germinate because remember, they're a cool loving flower. So that means they're going to want cooler temps for germination. So we go ahead and we keep the temperatures around 70 degrees. So if you're germinating things on a heat mat, you'll not want to use that for the pansies. Keep them cool and germinating. You do have to start them early. So we started these actually in early January, and we planted them into these planters 8 weeks before last frost. The reason that we plant them out early is because they really prefer to establish in cold temperatures. That's going to help them get the roots down so that once the temperatures warm up even just a little bit in spring, that these will start to elongate out because they've already established their root system. And so we start them in January. Our last frost is usually around mid-May. Start them in January and we plant them out 8 weeks before that last frost. So for us, that's mid-March. They are totally fine in snow. These planters get snowed on often, but it is really nice to put the pansies into containers. And this is one of the tips that I also like to give when we're talking about growing pansies for cutting, because the nice thing about putting them in planters is two things. You can plant them out early and they're still really easy to protect in case you get a sudden spring freeze. So we can always move these pots inside our garage, inside our greenhouse if we need to. But the other nice thing about it is that when it gets hotter in the summer, we can actually move these into the shade. So if you're planting in the ground, you'll want to plant somewhere that gets some afternoon shade, especially as temperatures start to warm up, because these pansies really prefer cooler temperatures, and the cooler temperatures are what's going to help them get taller. A little bit of shade will also help them get a little bit taller because they have to stretch more toward the light. So what I do is I plant them in the containers so they're in full sun in early spring. Once we start hitting the warmer temperatures of late spring and early summer, I can move them to an afternoon shade location. Another way that we're able to get such tall stems is that we plant these really densely. So when you're looking at this planter of pansies, you can see there's a lot in here. We plant them actually about 2 inches apart, really no further apart than that. And there's a reason that we do that. Beyond wanting to get a lot of flowers into a tight space, we also want to make those stems stretch toward the light. So by planting them all in here really quite densely together, we are able to make them stretch up and out, and they're competing with each other for light. So as they're competing with each other for light, they're reaching up and out of the planter, and that's making them get taller stems. Now, when you're growing pansies for cutting, you also do want to deadhead them regularly. So once they start to get really full like this, I'll usually send my kids out and let them pick a lot of the ones off the top. Then we can make sugar out of them. We can put them into ice cube trays and make pretty ice cubes. We do deadhead them, and that helps to keep them producing, because once they start going to seed, they are going to slow down on the flower production. So they're just like any other annual flower in that way that we have to keep deadheading them or cutting them in order to keep them producing. Now, once the temperatures start to warm up, they are going to slow down. So again, this is why it's nice to have them in a planter that is movable because we can move them into a shadier spot. And because we're growing in containers, we usually don't use fertilizer anywhere else when we're growing in ground. But because we're growing these in a container, containers just tend to leach out nutrients much faster, and they don't really have the same soil life availability that in-ground growing does, which is why normally I prefer to grow in ground because it's less fertilizer, it's less work. I let the soil life do a lot of the work for me, but in the containers, we do need to give them a little bit of extra nutrition. I will fertilize them with a little bit of fish emulsion once every couple of weeks. And so I do about a tablespoon per gallon of fish emulsion in water. So once July hits and once these fizzle out, then we can go ahead and cover crop this container just like we would an in-ground bed. And that helps build soil organic matter. So we'll probably do something like oats and peas in here, and it's really easy to terminate when you're dealing with a pot situation because you can just cut it right down. If you leave these pansies, they will go to seed and you can collect the seed for next year. And you can see that as I'm cutting these, I'm stripping off all of the lower leaves. So this is the downside of growing pansies as a cut, is the processing of pansies is more difficult because, as you can see, they have a lot of leaves and side shoots. So I'm having to take these off with my clippers because the stems are more delicate than a lot of the other stems that we use for cuts. Because they've had to stretch and reach, they're a little bit weaker stemmed. And so that means that we're having to be careful as we're stripping those lower leaves. But remember that we do always want to strip those lower leaves so that we're able to keep our water clean. All right, I hope this motivates you to give pansies a try for cut flowers. And even if they don't get tall enough, remember there are lots of great uses for pansies. And as always, if you like this video, remember to like and subscribe. See you next time.